So we are discussing today Banking 4.0, Industrialization of Finance, Risk and Compliance Functions with Jaya Vaidyanathan, the CEO of BCT Digital, and Mohan, Bhatia, the author of Banking 4.0, the Industrialized Banks of Tomorrow. A quick introduction about Women Who Code. Our mission is to inspire women to excel in technology careers. And our vision is to see a world where diverse women are better represented as engineers and tech leaders. We have a code of conduct which requires Women Who Code as a very inclusive community, and our code of conduct can be found on womenwhocode.com/code of conduct. Anyone can sign up to be a member of Women Who Code over a meetup page, and you can see the meetup page of Women Who Code Hyderabad. And you've signed up using this meetup page, and once you're a member, you can get alerts for the future sessions as well. We have various tracks and communities. Women Who Code has 88 plus chapters worldwide, and number of communities, if you see front-end, mobile, Python, blockchain, cloud, data science. And today we are doing, as you can see, a panel and fireside chat, lightning talk with Mohan and Jaya. About Women Who Code, we have 6 chapters in India, and VMware is one of the key sponsors for Bangalore, Chennai chapters. And you can see this is an Nirman conference in 2021 done by VMware in December 2021. And similarly, there are events, virtual events like Connect Reimagine carried out twice in the year 2021. And these are the virtual conferences attended by participants across the globe. We had Connect India on August 27 and September 3. Just a second. Women Who Code Hyderabad has 3 key tracks that we have created. One is my screen visible?
Yes.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, somebody pinged, so I was just a bit carried out with there. So there are 3 tracks. One is to a mid-senior leadership track. That's the kind we are running today. It is to offer women leader role models and with tech talks and leader community and regular opportunity to meet and network. Second is about supporting and mentoring women in early technology careers. And here connect with the colleges and mentoring the young students on hackathon and internship opportunities. And finally, we have our Get Women to Career, Back to Career with a from a career break initiative. And we have named it Rise, Reboot, Invest, Scale and Empower. And we ran our first batch in 2021. This is to provide technical mentoring, hands-on coding experience, and upskilling and cross-skilling opportunities. Women Who Code Hyderabad, we have 3 co-directors, myself, Saraswati, and Mani. In last year, we started in April 2021, and we are 1,500 plus member community. And in year 2021, we carried out 77 events. And with this, we have been able to get our name in leaderboard in 2021 across the geographies. We stand in top 10 in 3 categories out of 4. In number of new member additions, fastest growing in number of events. This is a quick snapshot of the mid-senior leadership track events we did last year. And you can see the variety of events, and a lot of them around digital, cloud, agile, DevOps, RPA, etc. So a variety of topics. And this is a snapshot of the speakers in early career. You can see computational biology or guidance around the internships, etc. done with the young engineers in the companies like Google, Microsoft, etc. Rise, we created 3 tracks last year, testing Java and Hadoop, and you can see the curriculum here. And we trained more than 40 women, out of which 18 graduated, and most of them have either found job or are on their way to find job. We created our SME pool of 30 plus volunteers who have imparted knowledge to these women to be career ready. And these are the 18 women who finally completed assessment. And as of today, 8 of them have found job and rest are in progress. These are the events we have carried out in 2022. So we are today starting our event with Mohan and Jaya. So Mohan, is starting with you. Your topic is, the book topic is around industrialization and banking 4.0. Some initial thoughts around why are the banks industrializing?
Sure. Dr. Renu, would you be projecting this, your presentation? Yes. Or I can also project.
So is it not projecting? Is my screen not visible?
Now it is, but it is not in the projection mode. If you can put it in the projection mode, that will be good.
Yeah.
So thanks, Dr. Renu, for inviting me, and thanks Jaya also for joining us today. So the question is that why are banks industrializing? Now we can look at what is happening in the banking industry or in the BFSI industry in general. The most important thing which is happening world over globally is that we are in now low interest rate regime, where there is a high cost to income ratio. In some of the countries, cost to income ratio is even 80 to 100%. So all gross income after paying interest, that gets utilized towards running the banks. So unless banks, they are going and industrializing, they actually are not able to meet the cost of running the bank. So that is one aspect. And if we look at how this entire banking or technology in banking or the banking processes, they have evolved over a period of time. We started, the banking industry started with the mainframe, and that was actually to keep the record. Mainframe was used. Then as a part of banking 2.0, the mainframe got replaced with the core banking and open systems. And as a part of 3.0, the entire channel and self-service actually started establishing. And now we actually are talking about, as it is happening in any other industry, that we are banks are trying to introduce intelligence into their application, intelligence into their machine, and they actually are trying to industrialize so that they actually are able to get into that new cost framework as a part of this. The other is, if you look at, especially for example, India, where 65% population is less than 35 years. Those the entire population is born in the internet age. They actually have got educated in the internet age and so on and so forth. Now, what does it mean? Basically, is that this generation Z, they have permanently shifted their residence. They are no more coming to our branches. They no more come to our internet banking channels. They no more come to our ATMs and other things. All of them actually have shifted to something like Amazon and Flipkart, shifted to WhatsApp and others. So all of them actually have started residing behind the applications. So we no more interact with human beings and individuals, etc. But banks are actually interacting with applications which are not their own applications, but applications which are consuming the services of banking are the applications of marketplace. It is applications by the third party and commercial organizations, etc., which are actually consuming these services. So they actually are shifted. So it means basically that banks need to provide their services to the applications. So they need to make their machines more intelligent. They need to industrialize their machines so that they actually are able to provide these services to marketplace, and that also in the real time. And the way this entire consumption of services are happening is that it has actually completely changed and it has become more and more conversational. So it's no more a structured data somebody is coming to the ATM and pushing in some numbers and getting the dollars or INR out, but it is actually the conversational thing. And we know that what we actually is happening on WhatsApp and what is happening on other cloud and other places. So it is basically to provide services to the customers who have shifted their thing. And third is actually that if you look at development in the fintech industry, they actually came as a wake-up call in the 2012. Then they become partner, and then they actually become competition and then partner. And now they actually have become the benchmark. So when we do a lot of innovation, we look at fintech actually as a benchmark, and they actually are setting the new benchmark for the innovation and providing competition and other things. So banks need to match actually the capabilities created by fintech as a benchmark. And fourth is entire regulators, they have become technology savvy, and they actually have got into, they have set up their sandbox. They actually are talking about machine related reporting and all those type of things. They have completely changed the way regulatory reporting, conduct rates, etc. is happening. So that is one aspect which is external. Internally, customers have changed. Generation Z actually has happened. So another thing is that when we talk about value creation for the customer, we used to feel that over a life of the customer, we need to create value. But now when we talk about the customer journey, we are talking about when customer wakes up at 5 a.m. till 12 midnight. What are the different things customer is doing? How actually banks can do that? Banks can contribute and banks can participate in that entire customer journey during the entire day. And this is also basically driver which is coming actually from that marketplace as well as high cost, so that banks actually are trying to come out with the products which actually can provide services which can embed itself into the different aspect of the economic cycle. Other is this entire technology development which has changed. What we are seeing is that cloud actually has come into being. We are talking about that entire industrialization of data platform and so on and so forth. What we started as actually as an infrastructure as a service, it has actually grown, and now we are talking banking AI as a service, banking as a service, risk as a service, finance as a service, etc. So entire automation actually has changed and become more intelligent, what we calling it actually as a banking 4.0. This is primarily because the capacity, the processing capabilities, the cost of technology, processing capabilities has gone up, cost of technology has gone down drastically, and now we have got the capabilities to process the unstructured data. And if you look at banks now, the 95% data in the bank is actually unstructured data and so on and so forth. So that is one of the reason why banks actually are industrializing. Maybe that externally, internally, both capabilities have developed as well as the demand for the requirement actually has changed.
Okay, thanks, Mohan. That's very useful. And you talked so much about why are the banks industrializing, and we have seen them say banking 2.0, 3.0, and today we are talking banking 4.0. So what does an industrialized bank look like with all these drivers that you mentioned?
Two things actually. One is that we actually are talking about bank 3.0, and when we are trying to extend and push the envelope, probably a lot of work is being done in terms of automation, in adoption of RPAs, adoption of analytics, visualization, and other things. But when we actually are talking about industrialization, it actually is a completely different paradigm. And many a times this paradigm is completely different, and there is not that it is an extension of the automation or it is more and more of automation. For example, when we actually are talking about when we are talking about ATM and self-service, etc., now we actually are talking about the digital experience. So that is what basically is changing. Self-service and digital experience, there is a completely different things. And then we are also talking about in terms of predicting. So creating more, making it more and more predictive, or what we can call it actually as making it more and more human, that we actually are able to see, and we are able to, bank's application and machines are able to converse with the customers, etc. And for that, they require that entire cognitive capabilities, their machine needs to upgrade and so on and so forth. They are able to do the prediction, and those predictions are actually based on the basically based on the learning which actually has come of dealing with the machines on the other side. So, and as we know that starting when we started this entire automation, it was actually done for the low complexity type of applications with a high volume. And now we actually are talking, when we are talking about industrialization, it is more about the dealing with the high complexity in terms of conversational banking, in terms of prediction, in terms of banking AI, in terms of digital experience, and so on and so forth. So that is what basically is the differentiating between, you can say, industrialization and automation, or industrialized bank basically.
Thanks, Mohan. That's very useful. I see that your book covers a lot about an industrialized bank. Would you like to delve a bit more on this back office part of it?
A couple of things actually. One is that when we are talking about industrialization, the purpose is to digitize the experience. We are talking about digital experience, and that is not only actually in the front office for the customer, it also includes the digital experience for employees and for the partners and other things. It basically means that back office also needs to be industrialized and digitized, as we actually are talking about digitizing the front office. Another is that industrialization, so that customers, so that applications have become intelligent and others. And to make the application intelligent, the DNA, the backbone is actually the industrialization of this entire risk, finance, and compliance area. So we actually are talking about building this in, or industrializing this entire back office and mid office in terms of intelligent finance, and in terms of operational risk 3.0, in terms of risk measurement, in terms of risk as a service, and so on and so forth. So this actually risk industrialization is the backbone on which this entire you can say the edifice or the building of banking 4.0 is actually built.
This is great. Thank you so much, Manoj, Mohan. So let me move on now to our further questions with Jaya. So Jaya, this industrialization is happening, and you and your company, BCT Digital, is specifically into risk management, and you have products around industrialization for risk function. I would request you to dwell a bit more on that.
Sure. I can talk quite a bit on risk and compliance management. And, as it's been outlined on why banks are industrializing, the thought is to more look at a lot of decisions which were originally thought of as being a gut feel, is more how do you take the gut feel and make it science. So it is to mimic, the judgment as closely as possible, so that it can be an industrialized process rather than as a one-off kind of a judgment, which is more what we call as industrialization. So one of the things that, was alluded also earlier is how fintechs are kind of partners in this ecosystem, rather than what they were looked at in terms of bringing in specific skills, or looking at what they bring in terms of like a competition. It's more like, banks use fintechs as an extension, primarily because they are specialized providers of both the domain and competencies in a specific area, which is something that banks don't have to develop necessarily. So one key component of the industrialization in banks also is to be looking at doing what they fundamentally are supposed to do, which is competency in areas such as, like, say, asset management or core competencies, and let a lot of what comes in terms of deep domain, in terms of technology, to the fintech providers. So that is something that you would see is key part of the industrialization. It was covered in terms of what AI, ML is used in terms of capabilities of looking at processing patterns, looking at processing unstructured data. But what is also looked at is that I would probably, you spoke a little bit about back office. I would probably focus on areas such as risk management that could be either front office, mid office, or back office, depending on what you're looking at. Let's look at some of what happens in the area of social lending now, because you can't kind of like just use credit ratings because they're applicable for more larger companies. Let's say, what do you do with borderline credit ratings? So you use a lot of the social parameters to say if the person can cross the border in terms of a good risk lending platform. So that is something that we actually use quite a bit of it. One of my key areas that we use in risk management is, for instance, in the area of NPA management, right? So what happens is, you have non-performing assets because of two reasons. One is willingness to pay, second is ability to pay. So ability to pay is something that comes from a lot of structured data analysis. The willingness to pay comes from a lot of what we look at unstructured data, which is essentially looking at, let's say that you set up a beneficiary. That's a lot of risk in terms of whether that's actually going as a diversion of funds. Instead, you would kind of go into the big data realm and kind of look at, is this person or the beneficiary one of those blacklisted companies? Have they been subjected to frequent management audits? Have they been one of those companies that are, been in the news for the wrong reasons? So you use a lot of contemporary data, which is in-time data at a specific point of time. And then before the transaction happens, in real time, you can stop it from happening, which is one of the benefits of risk management, where you look at things from a preventive perspective rather than a forensic perspective. As in, after the deed has been done, you don't do post-mortem analysis, but you're able to do in-time analysis, and that's a key component of what goes in. Now, a lot of conversation has been happening, and I know that my earlier speaker also spoke about conversational AI, a lot of how do you kind of mimic a human being. And I see a lot of younger generation also dialed into today's call. And one of the things you will notice is a lot of traction around metaverse, for instance. So how do banks lend in alternative channels, including an AR, VR kind of a mode, is something that's very, very important. And with that, Web 3.0 comes a load, the way that you look at risk management or alternative lending or platform-based financial analysis, either in the metaverse world or in what we now call as embedded finance, which is financing, banking, lending, all being part of your everyday operation rather than going into a realm of saying it's banking. So our approach to looking at industrialized risk management is that risk and compliance should not be a spend factor. It should be something that is more a payback. It's a competitive advantage in terms of how do you look at it. Even if you're looking at unstructured data in the realm of risk management, we use a lot of work, or we get about 3,000 data points from unstructured data, from data sources that are, earlier not tapped much, such as OCR recognition. So a lot of soft data parameters also go into key decision-making in the risk management realm.
Thanks, Jaya. And so we heard so far about industrialization that is happening in banking, the front office and back office use, drivers. And then Jaya, specifically, you spoke about the product and, the industrialization, especially in risk and compliance space. Now, Mohan, over to you again. And as you have worked long in banking industry, and you're talking industrialization, what are the key specific use cases that you have seen the industry, adopt to for industrialization?
See, if you look at this entire industrialization process, industrialization of bank and industrialization of finance, risk and compliance function, it's basically a journey. It's a decade-long journey which is going to happen. It's not that everything comes overnight and it is going to come overnight because it's not that banks are going to stop working and they will convert everything industrialized. It is basically a continuous process. One project needs to build on the other project. Once we start in one line of business and then we actually extend it and bring it to other line of business. Basically, what is required is to build innovation and industrialization actually as an approach or as a culture or as a BAU. Now, to bring it actually as a part of that long-term vision that we need to actually industrialize because we want to get into that, we want to cater to the new customers, we want to get into embedded one, we want to get into and comply with the requirements of the regulator, and we want to have the partnership and benchmark, etc., with fintechs and so on and so forth. These are the 8 types of use cases which actually banks are trying in the risk finance and compliance area. One is that, as Dr. Jaya also mentioned, that it actually has to be as a competitive advantage. So to bring that competitive advantage and especially talk about that embedded finance, etc., this entire computation need to move to the real time. It can start with moving basically input in the real time and then ultimately end with providing also output in the real time. Then other is that we know that this entire models at present, accuracy and Gini coefficient, etc., which actually may be in 65, 70%, etc. This needs to be improved. And one of the things which we have seen that a improvement is actually coming by use of this entire public data sets which are available, all the government data sets which actually are available, and so on and so forth. So that is where that entire accuracy or by use of AI, ML, etc., so that this entire thing actually can be done in the digital experience and in the self-service, and no more human intervention may be required actually, and another thing. Third is that risk management at present, which was actually confined only to the risk management department, etc. Now this actually, you have to make it actually transparent. Risk management department actually, if you ask me frankly, has to disappear, and everything actually has to be done by the front office. So if it has to go to the front office and empower the front office, the system actually need to be capable of providing services to the large number of users. So all the users in the front office, including the customers who may be able to do the lot of simulation, etc., for themselves. Other is this entire model validation, automation, etc. We actually are talking about various types of models, including the models for decision making, stress, and other things, accounting, IFRS 9, IFRS 17, and so on and so forth. Now, if you do an estimation of a large bank, like $1 trillion bank, etc., they may be having some 4,000 to 20,000 models, and those models need to be managed, etc. And this actually is going to go with the 10x. So another use case which we are seeing as a part of that is that they actually are getting into that, building those pipelines, getting into machine learning pipelines, model pipelines, so that models can be deployed and improved upon, and so on and so forth. And then ultimately this as self-service and visualization actually as a part of the digital experience for the back office. And obviously, as Dr. Jaya also mentioned, that use of that unstructured data, and that is where actually, along with this high accuracy and public data set, that actually is making the big difference in that thing. And that these use cases may be taken one by one at a time, but it actually requires that entire vision actually for the risk finance industrialization as well as for the industrialization of bank.
Just to add maybe a couple of points to that note, is when speaking about model risk management, a couple of interesting use cases to drive that point is that a lot of statistical analysis goes into model risk validation. So it is all a lot of mathematical stress testing, statistics, etc. The other side of model validation is more the qualitative side of model risk management. This is where you kind of see that a lot of subjectivity in terms of why certain things happen. That is a component that increasingly AI is being used for the qualitative angles of model risk management. Let me explain with a couple of examples. Now, what happened when COVID was a black swan event? Nobody expected COVID to happen. And when it did, there was a lot of, for instance, you don't know what is the actual loss due to regular business and what is the actual loss due to COVID impact. And as you would see in layman's terms, in an annual report, for instance, you kind of say, you have a shareholder section where you say, here is the quantification of losses due to COVID. And that depends on a number of parameters, which were very new. So all the traditional stress tests failed in this scenario. So you had to look at new parameters to decide what was the actual loss due to COVID. Those new parameters would have been supply chain disruptions, which is now happening worldwide, increasingly happening due to the Russia-Ukraine war. And a lot of supply chain disruptions, which already happened, were now accelerated due to the war. And then you had your accounts payable, accounts receivable, mismatch position. And then you had, for COVID specifically, you had availability of vaccines, which changed by different countries. So how do you kind of take all of these parameters and put that into actual numbers and then model the availability of vaccine in different countries and then say, here is the quantum at risk from your portfolio or return based on what is that kind of a variation. So actual quantification of losses due to COVID were based on a lot of new variables that were introduced, which had to be quickly simulated to kind of come up with a qualitative parameter which had a basis in a quantitative aspect. So a lot of nuances on how you kind of use this to look at data very differently and do a different sort of analysis. And now more and more stress testing based on extreme circumstances, which are very high impact, which were erstwhile low probability, but now the probability has upped because of worldwide events that are unfolding now.
Thanks, Jaya. And now I have a question for both of you. And we spoke about digitization, and the question is industrialization. And the question is that often digitization and industrialization are being used, interchangeably. Is digitization any different? And are there any specific use cases you want to talk about? So question to both of you. Over to you, Manoj. I'm sorry, Mohan.
So a couple of things in that digitization. So when we talk about digitization, we actually are talking about the digital experience of the back office people. We are talking about digital experience of regulators, etc., with the bank and so on and so forth. Now, some of the things which actually, because of the development in the technology, what is happening is that what used to be called actually as a report or the regulatory report, now it actually has further got refined, and now we actually are talking about, and we are able to differentiate between report and dashboard with the scorecard and with so on and so forth. So some of the things which actually are emerging as a part of this, as a part of the digitization initiative, is that can we use the unstructured data as a part of that? So that is one of the thing which we actually are running across, whether it is a credit risk, whether it is an AML, whether it is a part of liquidity risk, a part of market risk, etc. Can we actually use unstructured data and so on and so forth? The other type of use cases which actually is emerging actually is that what is the level of accuracy which we are talking about. For example, we are talking about report and dashboard, and then we are talking about bot and other things. That there is a difference between the two in that accuracy level. And when we are actually talking to providing this to the regulator, it needs very high level of accuracy and so on and so forth. And third is that whether it can be on demand, on real time basis, and so on and so forth. So that is the third type of use cases which we actually are talking and seeing, and where we actually are seeing that demand. Other is that can we build a lot of scorecard into that dashboard, or can we make it what we can call it actually as a simulating, or can it be actually a predictive type of thing, etc. So if we look at, there are 3-4 dimensions on which this entire digitization is actually happening. Dr. Jaya, you may like to add.
Yeah, I think for most people, digitization was always associated with the front end of things, which is more what you call the digital user experience, which is more how do I kind of, as a customer, what is my relationship with the bank, which was more on the user customization side, was something that was prioritized as and known as digitization. And industrialization was technically known as one that, you know, the bank does to itself to make themselves more aligned for greater user experience. So I think that's where the line of separation most definitely happened in a customer's mind. But digital is one large initiative that kind of takes across not just the user experience kind of things, but we've seen examples happen. Let me explain this with an example. Like, we know a very popular bank that had their online services chat for quite a period of time. And most people thought because there was a problem with the channels, that's why they shut it down. But that was not true. They were doubling customers, they were adding people through omni-channels, and they were doing really well. But the fact that their investments in core technology or digitization on the mid and the back office did not keep pace with what they were doing on the front office. So while customer acquisition was happening, the ability to kind of serve the customers did not happen. And that is when, you know, for a common man, the stark realization that unless the back is ready, you can't kind of build a glorious front. Example is like when you're building a house, you can have an enormous, beautiful design, but unless the foundation is good, unless kind of the core elements is good, you can't keep adding more things to it, because at some point it's all going to collapse. So I think it was more about how do you kind of look at digitization in terms of core areas of the bank is very, very important, which is what we call as inside out transformation rather than an outside in transformation. So, you know, what does it mean for a customer? From a customer perspective, simply speaking, you need to have as minimal clicks to get an interaction with the bank. And whether, you know, it requires all your KYC, AML, all of that to be automated, or you kind of say minimal clicks. So I go in, I come out, and I have a very rich experience as a customer. And it should feel as if a human being is responding to you, and it should feel as seamless as what you do when you walk into a bank. So from what does it mean from the inside part of a bank? To enable the seamless user experience, they have to do a lot of, like, say you apply for a loan online. So what happens at the back end is that the bank should kind of be super real time. It should kind of actually do your creditworthiness check, including any kind of like borderline agreements or rate agreements, etc. That should happen seamlessly at the back, which takes into account real-time unstructured and structured parameters, as we talked about. It also looks at real-time stress analysis, outlier analysis, and then it kind of takes you to that entire user experience on a back end and a mid-office level that kind of is also instantaneous so that the digital experience looks seamless. So I think that's what is needed for a bank to look at it digitally, which is more focused on the mid and back office so that it can keep pace with this seamless user experience. So let's see, what does it mean for a bank? So now I would have risks coming from multiple silos. So I would have it coming from, like say, the credit worthiness of the borrower. It could be from the segment in which he operates. It could be the bank's kind of strategy with respect to that particular segment. So how do you kind of put all of these different buckets seamlessly come together and have one single view of the risk inherent so that your ability or decision-making ability is instantaneous, and therefore the customer feels all of that happens with few clicks and it's an instantaneous response, which is even better than walking into a branch and getting this entire thing done. Now, again, I'm kind of talking about what is forward-looking. Now, what is happening in the real data realm in terms of an online experience now has to be now transported into a web 3.0, and it needs to seamlessly translate into a metaverse kind of an environment, which is the future of what we're looking at. So that is kind of how I would look at the entire spectrum of digitization. The past, present, and the future.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jaya. And we will actually dwell a bit more in future specifically. So I think you all, both of you, Mohan and Jaya, spoke pretty much in detail about industrialization, digitization in finance, risk and compliance space. And now to your question, Jaya, past, present, and for foreseeing a bit more in future, what do you see the journey of industrialization going forward? So over to both of you, Mohan.
So this is actually a decade of innovation, because we already have, industry has already got the fintech as a benchmark. The narrative is already set by fintech and by the large technology and cloud companies that where this entire thing, as well as by the customers and Generation Z. So this actually a decade will be actually driven by the innovation. The question is that how do we bring innovation as a BAU? So we actually have gone through that entire management philosophy of scientific management and then all those things. Now we need to really think from this perspective that how innovation will actually can be done as a part of BAU. So a couple of things for that actually that will drive the next decade. That is where the industrialization of banks will actually take next step. So one is that we need to actually identify the engines of industrialization and innovation and provide a vision and supporting capital, because banks run on capital and vision both put together. So we need to actually create those 6 engines. In the book, I have made an attempt to identify those 6 engines, which is actually, as Dr. Jaya also mentioned, inside out and outside in. So on the left-hand side, the first 6 chapters are actually those for the inside out. And on the right-hand side, these are the 6 chapters on outside in view. So as a part of those engines, one is actually the engine, which is application modernization, which actually can be actually talked about digitization of front office as well as back office. Then building that entire agility into it, which is we can call it actually as a industrialization through cloud adoption, etc. Then the other thing is the building this entire data infrastructure and industrializing and creating the data platform, and especially the capabilities of visualization and analytics and dealing with NoSQL and the unstructured data and so on and so forth, as well as the data governance and metadata management to that extent. including for unstructured data and so on, so forth, and doing all these things in the real time. This is what actually gets into that entire industrialization, data infrastructure and other things. Then the most important thing basically is to make the provision of the capital on a continuous basis. And that is what we actually calling it as a paying of the technical debt on daily basis. So we banks actually should not keep that make that technical debt burgeoning and keep on increasing, etc. I have done analysis as a part of the book and have concluded that in many cases, some of the banks are so much burdened with the technical debt that they may not be able to survive in this industrialization. And as a part of my interviews, I had actually interviewed Madam Bhattacharya from SBI also. And one of the things which came out that those banks who are not able to pay off this technical debt and they are not able to get the capital required to support this entire transformation, either acquisition will take place or they need to do white labeling the products of other banks and so on and so forth. Another is this automation actually has to be differentiated from the industrialization. And we need to continuously look at that. How am I actually going to industrialize and not just automate the things. So that is actually inside out type of thing. And outside in is actually what is one of the thing is this entire industrialization, which is also driven by for the risk, finance and compliance, which is driven by the regulators. So regulators world over, they are talking about machine readable reports and so on and so forth. A lot of things things have happened in UK as well as in other parts, and innovative sandbox and other things are established by the regulator, which are actually driving this entire thing. All the things which are happening in cyber risk, operational risk, early warning signal in credit risk, etc. All those things, basically, they are the drivers which are actually driving outside in all the changes. And obviously, this establishment of this platform banking business, which is to embed bank into the entire economic process and so on and so forth, and building this entire what we can call it actually as a basically the front face of the bank, what we call it actually as an API banking or that application modernization extension of that actually, and building that API banking and open banking and so on and so forth. And what needs to be done is that entire banking AI actually has to be established. At present, what we actually do is that we actually go and use the existing libraries of generic libraries of whatever is available as a part of AI. And we feel that that is actually, but banking industry needs to champion its own, it needs to actually build its own libraries, and it needs to build actually its own semantic APIs, etc. So that they actually, the banking processes are automated and not generic, just the marketing related and other related things, whatever is at present available. And other thing is that working with fintech, so that we actually continuously bring the what we can call it actually as a fresh blood outside in, so that we actually are running this as a innovation in the BAU mode. So going forward, the next decade will be how do we actually change the entire management theories, change everything, entire thing, so that innovation is actually brought in a BAU mode. Dr. Jaya.
I'm going to give you some radical predictions, which is more, I know you have a laundry list here, but I want to talk about what is futuristic. Now, when you look at, you have the Polaroid cameras, and the disruption in the industry didn't come from the camera industry. It came from the mobile telephone industry, right? The biggest threat to your traditional photography came from the phone. So I think it needs to be what the game has just begun, as the title says. But banks have always had the distinction of kind of being followers as far as innovation goes in the past so many decades. They were always kind of leaning on other industries and trying to pick up innovation ideas from, say, retail, or innovation ideas from, various different industries and try to adopt them. They were always industries considered to be boring. And that came from a legacy of kind of having archaic, kind of heavy duty kind of systems that were very painful, And if any modification to that was considered to be very difficult. This decade, as you can see, was more focused on getting rid of all the legacy and focusing on being light on top, so that you can kind of build a modular fashion where you kind of reach out to best in breed and try to assimilate, fintechs as an example, and kind of keep to your core competencies and leave the others to kind of the ecosystem to have a play in terms of bringing the best to bear in terms of technology. That is starting now, and we'll see accelerated growth in the coming decade. So what does it mean to you? The biggest disruption is not going to come for the banks from the banking industry. It is going to come from the non-banks. For example, the traditional taxi industry was dramatically disrupted not by the taxi industry or the logistics industry. It was, disrupted by a technology company that says, I don't hold any of these taxis, I don't own any of them, but I'm going to give you a marketplace that kind of does this connectedness. Same parallel you will see in the banking industry. So as long as banks, to stay relevant, need to focus on their core competency. It could be asset management, it could be lending, it could be a lot of what their core competency is. And a lot of the disruption is going to happen outside the industry. And it's more about how do you keep yourself as agile as possible to kind of be the one that adopts change with a smile and looks at it more from any investment that gives you a payback immediately. So I think it's more about looking at future in terms of being agile enough to adopt the best practices from the other industries and the disruptors, and kind of being poised yourself to kind of take that into account. So I think that's going to be a core test in terms of the way to move forward, which is agility is the name of the game. And for instance, we spoke a little bit about embedded finance. Now for the newcomers, what is embedded finance? Embedded finance is kind of like looking at financial applications in your day-to-day life. Like as you do your routine, the banks and the financial institutions or financing needs are seamlessly integrated into your everyday way of life. So you didn't have to go to a bank because you want to do banking. You could kind of, with a click of a few buttons while you're doing something else, have that capability or your lending platform disrupted by a lot of non-traditional players. So the Amazons of the world, the Reliances of the world, that's where your competition for the traditional setup is going to come from, and your ability to kind of be quick to innovate, you're quick to adopt new practices is going to be the mantra for survival, is going to be the mantra for competitive advantage. It's also going to be the way that you look at it. Now, within the bank, examples that you could take on is probably the risk and compliance function. Now, why do you take the risk and compliance function? If you ask a person on the road, that sounds to be the most boring topic of all, risk and compliance. But if you can actually flip that and say that risk and compliance is a competitive advantage because it enables you to do a lot of cool lending with, the risk kind of diminished and the reward increased, it becomes suddenly more interesting. How can compliance be a competitive advantage in the way the bank is positioned? And it does a lot of AI based, it does a lot of social or data points, big data based lending, and a lot of prediction, a lot of stress analysis, so that you kind of get into some of the cooler realms. And it's actually not a spend function, but it's actually something that gives you a payback, and it's tied to something that is a positive investment angle. Then suddenly it becomes very interesting. So that is the direction in which a lot of the future is going. And it's more about your average customer age in a bank is coming down. And that is a parameter, because the affluent are younger And you need to keep them through the banking cycle, tap them young, keep them young, and take them through the entire life cycle, which is something all banks really want to do. So a lot of focus on next gen banking, a lot of new channels, a lot of going where their world is, and then looking at how do you lend to that world. Rather than asking them to come to your world, which is the banking world, it's more a pull factor, or you kind of like go into that world and kind of be there and do the lending, which is going to be a challenge in the nimbleness of the way the bank structures itself. The game has just begun and we have miles to go before we sleep.
Thanks, Jaya. That's very valuable for the practitioners. I think we already kind of spoke enough about where the banking is headed, where is the industrialization headed. And I see some chapters around the career and skills in Mohan's book. So I put this question, any career advice from you, considering this forum is specifically around women who code and tech practitioners. So what are the skills people should develop in the banking financial services industry? So over to you, Mohan, first, and then Jay. Mohan, you are speaking on mute.
Though I worked in the product, but I come from consulting industry. So where we actually have seen that the domain skills and technology skills are separate, but there is a need when we are talking about innovation and intelligence to be built, industrialization to be built, the same person should be able to understand what is required, and he should also understand, as Dr. Jaya says, big data and other things as a part of that, and entire agility and agile process, etc. So that is number one. Number two is that we actually talk about tables and data. It is no more tables and data. Everything is actually changed, and we are talking about data sets, and specifically the public data sets actually have become more important, are very important. And because if we need to build that accuracy and intelligence, then there is a lot of reliance on public data sets. Then entire computation. Then this computation actually is useful across. So the same computation is used for credit risk, and it is also useful. Those models are useful for lending and front office decision and so on and so forth. So understanding that entire template, or you can call that process, that where and what is being done, what decisions are being done, etc. And when we are talking about this data governance, data quality, etc., we need to look at that everything actually has moved to the pipeline in real time, and unstructured and structured data put together, where we have got machine learning, which is actually learning on real time, etc. So we need to also look at that entire thing, all over thinking and process on managing IT and data, etc. From that perspective, that how this entire technology is changing. So these are the some 3, 4, or 5 areas which are actually opening up. These are the areas which are opening up for the high paying jobs. Yes, Dr. Jaya, to you.
So when you say professional advice, I want to probably talk about how do you develop certain core competencies, not necessarily technical skills. I would say a very strong business orientation, because technology is now becoming, like I said, it's becoming a competitive advantage. It's where a lot of disruption happens. It's where a lot of materiality in terms of the way business is oriented becomes very, very important. So I think the end use in mind, and how do you kind of create the tools to enable the business outcome to happen, that kind of business analysis and an outward in view with an innovation mindset, I think is key. So develop a very strong business orientation, be an expert in a specific area, and expertise development through domain expertise is something very, very key. So I would say, you know, other than traditional parameters, I second the fact that data analysis is going to be very key, because you have a sea of ocean of data now. And how do you kind of make meaningful information from that is going to be really, really key, because there's a plethora of data. So data scientists, data analysts, AI experts, all of them are going to be very, very important. So your skills in that direction and anything you can do in terms of a full stack development and in terms of also newer skills in terms of machine learning, AI, data analysis, all of that are still going to be relevant at least for the next 3-4 years. And post that, I would say that that dimension is going to continuously change. And therefore, you need to also develop skills on Web 3.0, for instance, or keep watch out for what is next and how do you kind of adapt to it. So I would say a lot of focus on automation related skills, a lot of focus on analysis, data analysis, data science is really important if you ask for technical skills. But most important, I think it's the mindset. It's more about how do you kind of keep innovating, how do you keep learning to learn. I use this example often, which is, the mindset, which comes from, let's say that you learn a second language by the time you're 5 years old. You not only learn the language, but you learn how to learn languages. So as freshers coming out of college, or even like you've been in the industry for a few years, you have to kind of learn to learn new things and understand that change is going to be the only constant, especially in the technology industry. So that is something that you need to be very, very nimble and keep an eye on what's in the future and try to kind of be one of the first movers in terms of learning. With that would be my key professional advice, and always develop a very strong domain competence. You need to be the best that people go to for solving a particular issue or to understand a particular domain. And that is a competency that's going to be more and more relevant because you don't know where the next disruption comes from. So keep watching out for it.
Thank you. Thank you, Jaya, and thank you both of you. We are at the close of the session. Speaker contacts, Mohan's contact is there. Also, Jaya is available on LinkedIn. You can reach out. And Saraswati, my co-director, is there on the call. I'm requesting her if there are any questions and if she can moderate some questions. We can take 1 or 2 questions before we wrap up.
Yeah, I think we'll just take one question. Maybe we are 5 minutes over and I have to jump into some other meeting too. But this was very, very interesting. Thank you, Mohan, and thank you, Jaya. One question that I had is, in the context of so many changes in the last 2 years, how do you think regulators are responding to AI? And, I mean, many times it's not about how do you safeguard the existing models, but it's more a question of whether we want to do something using AI or using models, right? So how have you seen the shift?
I think regulators have been increasingly very open to these kind of newer platforms because I think once the use case of where it's going to be and how it taps into some of those hard to use areas, it becomes very, very relevant to them. And once the understanding is set up, they're actually quick to respond. Let me give an example. Like, for instance, when we had originally pitched the idea for early warning system, which was to use increasingly AI data analysis, use big unstructured data, look at a lot of predictive analysis, especially on the culture of not, your willingness, as I call, inability to pay. It had to tap heavily on AI, predictive analytics, etc. And the regulators were quick to respond to say that is a great source. And they were also, once you understand the realization, it moved from being a guideline to a necessity to all PCA banks having to necessarily comply with that and became a mandatory framework very, very quickly. So I think, the reaction has been admirable, and more, not only in India, but worldwide, a lot of bringing fintechs onto the ecosystem and giving like those opportunities with the help of sandbox, with the help of like regulatory guidelines, or the ability to kind of access to data and swiftly onboarding onto multiple platforms, ability to kind of look at core APIs, now more and more credit bureau information and how that can be accessed through authorized angles, and a lot of thrust for and reward kind of mechanisms wherein regulators come with technology partners and banks to form an ecosystem where fintechs can play has been an increasingly the way forward that they're looking at. So I would say quite progressive in terms of the outlook in terms of core innovation.
That is a very good perspective. Thank you for sharing that, Jaya.
Fully agree with Jaya.
You were saying something.
No, I'm saying fully agree with Jaya. Regulators are encouraging and enabling innovation. They actually are catalyzing innovation. Their entire framework is actually innovative or innovation oriented actually. The entire regulatory framework is changing and they actually are coming out with innovative.
That's very, very encouraging actually. Yeah.
Yes. Because I come from Reserve Bank of India. So I've been reading their circulars now for the last few years with a lot of interest. And there is a complete change in that approach and outlook. And even their skills, they have changed. So even in India, they have set up this entire innovation hub. They are setting up the data science laboratories and so on and so forth.
Sure.
Thank you so much. Both of you, Mohan and Jaya specifically, I know it's a midnight for you.
It's actually 4 o'clock in the morning.
So in fact, when we set up time, I was not aware that you accepted it in US time zone. Thank you for being available. We really appreciate this. Will be on YouTube and I'm sure with wide audience. So thank you for doing this. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Mohan, you can stop the video recording now. Thank you.